we'll hopefully have more participants coming. I'll start the webinar. Welcome everyone. We are pleased to see such a great turnout for our webinar today about PFAS contamination in our drinking water. I am Vaishnavi Raman, President and founder of Clean Water New Jersey, an organization led by West Windsor Plainsboro High School North students working to educate and reintroduce safe drinking water to all of New Jersey's communities. And I will be the host for today's webinar. We will be recording today's session. All lines are muted, and if you have any questions for our panelists, you can post them using the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. Your questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar. For those wondering what PFAS is, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or in short PFAS, are a family of man-made chemicals. PFAS are found in many household items, from cookware, shampoo, dental floss, makeup, pizza boxes, and water repellents used in fabrics. These are only a few of the many everyday objects that contain PFAS. They get their name forever chemicals due to their lasting impact on the environment and on the human body, as these chemicals can enter and stay in the body for many years and even decades. Research involving humans suggests that high levels of certain PFAS may lead to harmful health outcomes, including cancer, increased cholesterol levels, and immune system effects. We have a wonderful panel of experts joining us today to share their expertise on this topic. Ms. Kelly Smalling and Dr. Paul Bradley from USGS, Dr. Arjun Venkatesan from NJIT, Ms. Dorina Aliu from EPA, and Ms. Laura Norkute from American Water. First, we will hear from Ms. Kelly Smalling and Dr. Paul Bradley from United States Geological Survey. Ms. Kelly Smalling and Dr. Paul Bradley are part of the United States Geological Survey. Ms. Smalling is a research hydrologist from USGS. Her current research focuses on the occurrence, fate, and effects of emerging contaminants, including current use pesticides in the environment. Dr. Paul Bradley is a research hydrologist and ecologist with USGS focused on understanding environmental contaminant mixture exposures and real versus perceived effects on human and environmental health. Both Ms. Smalling and Dr. Bradley will be introducing to us what PFAS is in more detail and presenting the research that they have done on PFAS. Over to you, Ms. Smalling and Dr. Bradley.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us. We're excited to be here today and to kick off this really important webinar. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, I'm going to provide an overview of our PFAS tap water study that came out. Oops. Hold on one second, technical difficulties. Our PFAS tap water study that came out earlier this year. So before getting into the nitty gritty about PFAS, I want to give you all kind of an overview of what Paul Bradley and I do for the U.S. Geological Survey. We really focus on drinking water science. So I'm going to focus on why we're doing this kind of work, where we do it, and kind of how we collect our samples. And this is really important in introducing the topic of PFAS and kind of how we got to where we are with this national recon. So first of all, we've got to think about the quality and the sustainability of drinking water. There are growing challenges in the US as well as globally due to increased water demands and contamination of drinking water resources. Currently, there are hundreds of thousands of different substances, including PFAS, that are produced globally, meaning that this environmental complexity, which is represented by that heat map on the left, really continues to challenge drinking water treatment technology. And this complexity is actually far outpacing existing regulations. Overall, in the U.S., there's about 90 substances that are regulated, and we have health advisories for about 300 substances of those hundreds of thousands. Also in the U.S., there are 3 distinct distribution pipelines for drinking water, and they can all be a route of exposure to complex mixtures of contaminants. So public supply, which we're going to talk a lot about today, it's regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and it's monitored at the drinking water treatment plant prior to distribution. Next is bottled water, which is regulated by the FDA as a foodstuff. And the last distribution pipeline are private wells. Private wells are rarely monitored and they're not regulated by the EPA, which means that these folks really have no information on their drinking water quality. And based on work by our group and others, we know that these complex mixtures of contaminants are present in sources of drinking water like surface water and groundwater, and that many of these contaminants actually make it through the treatment process because ultimately the treatment is not designed to remove contaminants. In this country, we're also grappling with aging infrastructure. We've all heard about lead in Flint. There's stories coming out about lead in Philadelphia schools. We're also hearing about high visibility water quality failures, as well as issues like PFAS, which we're talking about today. And these are all leading the public to really ask if their tap water is safe. So these and other factors like dependence on water reuse due to a changing climate, limiting monitoring of private well water, and new research that's linking health outcomes with really low contaminant exposures, they all contribute to concerns over the safety of our drinking water. So these concerns have led public health agencies to specifically ask the USGS. The U.S. Geological Survey is the nation's science agency. So we do science to support decisions, science to support regulations, but we don't regulate. So folks come to us specifically for information on contaminant exposure, and public health agencies are really interested in that information at the point of use. So at the tap where exposure actually occurs. And they're also interested in using what we call our expanded analytical toolbox, which includes both regulated, so the regulated contaminants I discussed earlier, and unregulated contaminants. So right now we have about 400 organic contaminants, which include things like PFAS, pesticides, pharmaceuticals. We also include inorganics like nitrate and uranium and arsenic, as well as microorganisms in our analytical suites. And although this may appear like a lot of contaminants and a really robust list, if you recall back to the beginning of my talk, it's really only a fractional representation of that potential human exposure through drinking water. So PFAS are one of those organic contaminants that we've been monitoring for in tap water since 2016. And these PFAS issues in drinking water and the potential health effects really have been driving the public narrative over the last few years. And as was mentioned at the beginning, PFAS have been manufactured and used in a variety of industries in the US since the 40s. And based on the most recent estimate, PFAS is now a class of greater than 12,000 unique substances. They're all highly fluorinated and they're all man-made. And also due to their chemical structure, they're very resistant, which is great as a consumer product, but they can also persist in both the environment and the human body. So PFAS has been found in human plasma and it can be transferred maternally. And there's been some recent studies that have linked PFAS exposure to both metabolic and immune disorders, as well as certain types of cancers. At this point, we can find PFAS in almost anything, from firefighting foams to stain resistant and water resistant, grease resistant products paints, cookware, etc. And specific sources of PFAS, they include industrial and manufacturing facilities, airports, military installations, wastewater treatment plants, as well as oil and gas development. It's important to note that humans also are exposed to PFAS through eating fish that are contaminated with PFAS, as well as crops grown in areas where biosolids, which are another source of PFAS, have been applied. At this point, PFAS is in everything, from the rain to the surface water, to the groundwater, to our soils and our ecosystems. But in the US and globally, there's really not a lot of information available on PFAS in point of use tap water. So with most of the drinking water studies really focused on samples from source waters like surface water or groundwater, or from community water supplies, with little to no information on private wells. So to better understand human exposure at the tap, we decided to conduct a national survey of PFAS using a network of volunteers. So we went out and we asked folks to collect samples from their taps. We sent them a kit, we sent them instructions, and they sent water samples back to us. We sent those out for analysis. And then we combined that data that we were able to collect from about 400 folks with data that we had collected previously from our other tap water studies. So all in all, we were able to get information from over 700 taps across the US, from about 450 public supplies and about 250 private well locations. So a pretty decent data set to start. So this map shows where PFAS was found across the country and where it wasn't found. So private wells here are represented by triangles, and public supply are represented by circles. Those colored circles and triangles are locations where at least one PFAS was found in the tap water. And those open circles and triangles are areas where we did not detect a PFAS in the sample. So from our study, PFAS, at least one PFAS was observed in about 30% of the samples we collected. So 30% of those about 700 samples had at least one PFAS. And what we found as well is we saw very few detections. We saw no detections in Hawaii and very few detections in the arid West or the Northwest. So you can see areas on this map where we just did not detect PFAS. We have also observed a wide range in concentrations across the country, ranging from about 1 to about 300 nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. So this is a really small number. And this map does a really nice job of helping you visualize hotspots of PFAS exposure. So you can see higher concentrations and more PFAS in areas like the Northeast. It's pretty much blanketed with detection, as well as California and the Great Lakes. So what's being depicted on this map is that the larger and the darker the circle, the higher the concentration in that sample and the greater number of PFAS that were observed. And again, you can note here the white circles are locations where PFAS just was not detected. So those last two slides are based on the actual data, so data that was collected from the tap. And the next few slides that I'm going to talk about are from our modeled results. So the goal of this was to take the information that we had collected and then expand out into unmonitored space. So try to understand what PFAS looks like across the country. So we wanted to predict more broadly to areas where we didn't sample. And then we also wanted to compare PFAS in samples collected from private wells to those from public supply, because that information is not available. So what our models showed was that there was really no difference in concentration of individual PFAS, total PFAS, which is just the sum of all the PFAS that were detected in that sample, or in the number of PFAS that were detected between public supply and private well tap water. And that's represented by this cartoon on the left. So those smiling little water drops represent the estimated median PFAS concentrations for private wells on the top and public supply on the bottom. And those lines represent what we call the uncertainty around that estimate. So this is just saying that there's really no difference between private wells and public supplies. And this information is really important because it gives private well users with no previous data some idea of their exposure risk, particularly in areas where we know PFAS could be observed frequently. So for example, a private well owner that has a groundwater well, they could utilize information provided by a local public water company if they too use groundwater to determine if they want to get their well tested or if they want to go ahead and take preventative action to reduce any potential exposure. So ultimately, the reason that, or ultimately the fact that we're not seeing a difference between these two, it's giving private well users a little more information than they had prior to this study. We also used our entire data set to estimate the probability of detecting between 1 and 10 PFAS in taps broadly across the US. So based on our model predictions, on average, about 45% of US tap water could contain at least one PFAS. Again, with no differences whether you own a private well or you get your water from a public supply. Also, taps are more likely to see 1 or 2 individual PFAS rather than upwards of 9 or 10. Our models also predicted that the probability of not detecting PFAS in tap water ranged from about 25% in urban centers like Chicago or areas that have known PFAS contamination to greater than 75% in rural areas. So based on the information out there, we tend to assume PFAS is everywhere. But I think what our results are showing us is that there are portions of the country that at this point, they do not appear to have any PFAS issues. I think we're going to go into this later in the webinar, but I wanted to give a brief overview on PFAS regulations because I'm going to compare our information to these proposed regulations. So first of all, it's important to note, currently PFAS is not federally regulated, but New Jersey does regulate 3 individual PFAS, PFNA, PFOS, and PFOA. But in March 2023, the Environmental Protection Agency did propose regulations for 6 PFAS. So these newly proposed, what's called maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, they're here on the screen, for PFOA and PFOS are 4 nanograms per liter. EPA also at the same time releases maximum contaminant level goals, or MCLGs. These are non-enforceable health goals, and they are established to protect the most vulnerable populations, like infants, children, the elderly, the immunocompromised. And any contaminant that's considered a likely or known carcinogen, they're given an MCLG of 0. PFAS is also the first class of chemicals where EPA is proposing regulations for a mixture of 4 PFAS. So they're taking what they call the hazard index approach, which is made up of a sum of fractions, and it's listed here on the screen. Basically, each fraction compares the level of PFAS measured in that water sample to the highest level to which there's no known risk of an effect, and then they add them all up. So for our study, proposed MCLs for PFOA and PFOS were exceeded in less than 7% of the tap water sampled. So less than 7% of those 700 samples that we collected. So what this means for public supply, if these regulations are enacted, an exceedance of an MCL would require action by the drinking water treatment plant. The graph on the right, the red line, represents the proposed MCL of 4 nanograms per liter for PFOA and PFOS. And the graph shows exceedances of that MCL. So this graph just shows the detections. So the bottom line is in locations where PFOA and PFOS were detected, the MCL for PFOA was exceeded in about 50% of the samples, and the MCL for PFOS was exceeded in about 70% of the samples. Again, when it was detected. So I'm getting ready to wrap up, and I've just inundated you with a ton of information, and I moved quickly because I only have 15 minutes. But I want to take these last couple of slides to leave you with some major takeaways. First of all, it's important to note that approximately 40 million people in the US rely on private wells for drinking water. And again, those are rarely monitored. And until recently, most national testing programs really focused on community water supplies that are serving greater than 10,000 consumers and rarely captured information from rural communities. So what that means is that small public supplies and private wells could actually be disproportionately affected by PFAS. And it emphasizes the value of this study and others which focus on exposures in private wells and those rural areas where information is currently not available. In the US, an estimated 45% of tap water may be contaminated with at least one PFAS. And we saw no differences in exposure between private wells and public supply. Results also indicated that detection probabilities, they varied spatially, and there are areas in the US where PFAS just was not observed. Also, the potential for human health effects from PFAS exposure, they are common and they are comparable in public supply and private wells. In order to serve this to the public, we developed an interactive PFAS dashboard, which allows you to explore the data. So our goal in this is to continue to update it as we get more data and as more data becomes available. If you scan the QR code here, you can get yourself to the dashboard, you can zoom in and you can zoom out, and you can turn on layers and you can kind of see what was detected in your area. And lastly, we've produced another tool that explains our tap water research and our portfolio. It also includes an interactive map that shows results by study area and chemical class. So this goes much broader than just PFAS. And we do link our PFAS dashboard, and it's been cross-posted to this page. You can also Google drop by drop USGS, and this will pop right up. Lastly, here's our contact information. This is our tap water team. Feel free if you have questions or want to reach out, send any or all of us an email. But what I want to leave you with today is that this currently is the most comprehensive study on PFAS exposure nationally at the tap, where people fill their glasses. It provides information broadly to state and local public health agencies, homeowners, decision makers, regulators, and especially private well users, particularly in areas where PFAS exposure and potential risk is high. Again, I want to thank you for your interest in this topic, for showing up on a Friday night. And at this point, I am going to unshare my screen and pass the mic on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Malling and Dr. Bradley, for providing us a great introduction on water contamination exposure and sharing your research on PFAS contamination. Also, thank you for providing our attendees some tools they can look into. So, how can we solve this problem? Let us hear from Dr. Arjun Venkatesan, who will share his latest research on treatment technologies and strategies for effective PFAS removal. Dr.
Thanks.
Dr. Venkatesan is an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at New Jersey Institute of Technology. He's currently the director of the Emerging Contaminants Research Laboratory at NJIT, where his team of researchers focus on the occurrence, fate, and treatment of emerging contaminants in the environment. Over to you, Dr. Venkatesan.
Thanks for the introduction, Vaishnavi, and thank you all for joining us today in this important webinar. Let me share my screen. So we had a great presentation from the previous speaker about the nationwide presence of PFAS in our tap water. And my presentation would focus on some of the treatment technologies that our group currently working at NJIT to remove PFAS from drinking water. I'm fairly new to New Jersey. I just moved a couple of months ago from Stony Brook University, which is in Long Island, so not too far away, where we also have contamination issues with PFAS. And I was working with a state center called the New York State Center for Clean Water Technology, where we evaluated various technologies to remove PFAS and also optimize those treatment systems to remove PFAS below our regulatory limit. So we already heard quite a bit about what are PFAS, but I want to briefly mention it again. These are a group of man-made chemicals. These are not naturally occurring. They can have multiple carbon-fluorine bonds. The reason I mentioned this is because the carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest bonds in the universe. So it's very hard to break. And you can see in this structure that I show on the right for two commonly studied PFAS, which is PFOA and PFOS, where you could see multiple carbon-fluorine bonds. So this is the reason why this chemical is so persistent in the environment and very hard to break down. And it also gives it very unique properties. And that's why we see so much of different applications, such as in nonstick cookware, in firefighting, as a coating in carpet, and so on, many other applications. And I also want to highlight again, like, we're not dealing with just one or two chemicals. PFAS is a family of chemicals, as the previous speaker mentioned. There are currently, we recognize more than 12,000 different PFAS compounds in the environment. And for example, you can see in the first slide, I showed you a structure of PFOA and PFOS, which is 8 carbons. But you could have like shorter chain compounds that has like smaller number of carbons, and the molecules is much smaller. But we could also have like a larger compound where the number of carbons can increase up to C14 for the carboxylic acid. And a similar like different chain length of PFAS also exists for sulfonates. And these are just 2 example groups of PFAS. But we are dealing with like several other groups that we still don't understand about their presence in the environment. So you can imagine the complexity that we're dealing with regards to regulation, with regards to detection of these chemicals, because we don't have standardized methods for many of these PFAS that we can study in water, and designing treatment systems that can efficiently remove all of these PFAS is also challenging, right? Because different PFAS exhibit different properties and different characteristics. So not one technology can solve the problem of PFAS, unfortunately, when it comes to drinking water treatment. So the PFAS treatment technologies can be broadly classified into 2 areas, like sequestration technologies or destruction technologies. What these mean is, in sequestration technologies, you don't break them down. The intent is not to break down the chemicals, but to capture them in different ways. One example is activated carbon filtration. And you will be familiar, many of you use like Pure or Brita filters at home that actually has activated carbon in it. And these carbon can provide surface for PFAS to attach to, and you could remove it from water. And similarly, reverse osmosis system can also remove PFAS, and there are other methods that you could remove. But sequestration technology just focuses on removing PFAS from water to another phase, or a solid adsorbent. Destructive technologies are more in developmental stage, where we are trying to break down this carbon-fluorine bonds, which gives this unique property and stability and persistence in PFAS chemicals. Some examples would be electrochemical treatment, electron beam, or plasma. These are all pretty much high energy related, because we are trying to break down one of the strongest bonds of carbon-fluorine bond in this structure. But realistically, when we're looking at drinking water treatment, we need a system that is cost effective. We also need to look at the economics and also the high efficacy in treatment of PFAS. And when you put together all these different technologies in a chart, which is more qualitative with regards to cost and the efficiency of treatment, we are trying to focus on systems that are in the lower quadrant, like in the right side where I'm highlighting with my marker. This is a technology that's currently available. So we're pretty much like limited to one or two technologies that are both cost effective and also efficient in treatment PFAS. And activated carbon filtration is one of the very common filtration approach that are used to remove PFAS from drinking water. So I'm highlighting some of the technology that we are currently focused on in our research to understand what's the mechanism of PFAS removal in these systems, and we're also trying to improve the removal of PFAS using some traditional water treatment approaches. PFAS has a very unique characteristics where PFAS try to accumulate at the air-water interface. What it means is PFAS are surfactant or surface active. So these wiggly structures that you see on the screen are PFAS molecules, and they tend to arrange themselves at the air-water interface. Why is this important? Because if you actually introduce air bubbles, just bubbles, some of the PFAS can actually arrange themselves on the surface of the bubbles, like how I have shown in this figure. Right. So the idea here is this treatment approach, like in our research, we are focused on introducing a lot of air bubbles in water. So it provides enough surface for PFAS to accumulate. And as you all know, when there's air bubble in water, it rises in the column. And when it reaches the surface of the water, you could try to remove PFAS from it. So this is a very simple approach that we are focused on. And it's very commonly termed as foam fractionation, PFAS foam fractionation. As you can see, this is a setup that we have currently in the lab where there's a column of contaminated PFAS water, and we introduce air bubbles at the bottom of the column, and you could see all these bubbles rising through the column. When these bubbles rise through the column, they pick up all the PFAS in the water and take it up, and from there you could remove PFAS. There are, of course, challenges in the applications of this. So here in this figure, you could see how this performed between a long chain PFAS, which has more number of carbons, and a shorter chain PFAS, which has less number of carbon. The long chain PFAS, after 30 minutes of bubbling in this reactor, you could remove like more than 80% of PFAS without any addition. So it really works well for chemicals like PFAS and PFOA, which are more surface active in properties. Whereas if you look at short chain compounds, PFBS, which is also one of the chemicals that's currently proposed for regulation, this approach does not really work because you could see the blue fraction that still remains in the water, and we don't see a lot of extraction coming out of it. So our research focused on how we could improve the extraction of even short chain compounds, and it led to the addition of an additive. So we ended up adding a cationic surfactant as an additive to water. And that kind of helped with removal of short chain PFAS, PFBS. So you could see in this figure, we were able to achieve removal to below detection removal of PFAS. Of course, the downside is you're adding another chemical during the treatment process. So we're working on how to limit the exposure of this chemical after treatment. So, but what we have found is it is possible to remove even the difficult short chain PFAS using foam fractionation. And this is a summary of how the foam fractionation works for both short chain and long chain PFAS. As you can see, for short chains, without the additive that we added, you don't see any removal. So this is the percent removal of PFAS occurring. You don't see a lot of removal, but when the chain length increases, when you reach to long chain, the blue bars, you can see you have better removal up to 80%, or in some cases, even 100% removal. But if you add this additive that we found through our research, it actually helps removing even the short chain PFAS. So the most difficult one was the PFBA, which is a 4-chain carboxylate acid. We were able to achieve more than 70% removal. So, and this is an ongoing research where we are trying to optimize this simple approach for PFAS treatment. Another research that we focused is on the activated carbon filtration as well. As I mentioned already, it's the most common approach for PFAS treatment. And the main mechanism by which you remove PFAS by GAC, or granular activated carbon, is through hydrophobic interaction. So if you remember the structure of PFAS, we have this long chain length tail of multiple carbon fluorine bond that exhibits hydrophobic properties for PFAS. And what hydrophobic, when I say hydrophobic, what it means is the chemical rather stay on a solid surface than being in water, being dissolved in water. So this long hydrophobic property of PFAS allow it to stick to this carbon surface like it's shown in this image. And that's the main mechanism by which you remove PFAS using a granular activated carbon filtration. Again, one of the challenges is in the removal of short chains, because short chains are not as hydrophobic as the long chain compounds. This is a pretty complex figure. I apologize for that. But what it really shows is the breakthrough of PFAS from your filter unit, right? This is a carbon filtration system. And if this curve, you can see it increases over time of operation. And that's because it's coming out of the column, or it's leaching out of your column into your treated water. As you can see, the leaching of the short chain compounds occurs first, and then the leaching of compounds occur for the long chain compounds. There are 4 PFAS studied in this particular work. And what this requires is once you see the breakthrough of these PFAS, you need to either replace your carbon material, or you need to have a different design to increase the lifetime of the carbon performance and the filtration. So the cost of operation increases over time. So our research is focusing on understanding why this breakthrough is occurring, what causes for PFAS to come out of the column. So we are doing this controlled column experiments in our labs to assess water quality that leads to PFAS breakthrough. And we also identified a new approach called hydrophobic ion pairing. Again, this is very similar to the foam fractionation approach, where we add this cationic counterion to the influent of filtration system, and that allows for efficient removal of even short chain PFAS. And to show the breakthrough curve for this approach, the hydrophobic ion pairing approach, you could see the difference in the absence of this additive. The chemical leaches out of your filter fairly quickly. This is over time, or this also represented as bed volume. But in the addition of this additive, you could see you could increase the lifetime of your carbon filtration system. That saves a lot of money, and it is also like this efficient. So this was shown in our lab scale experiments. We currently got recently funding support to do this in a pilot scale. So we're going to demonstrate this approach in a location on Long Island. And this is a pilot scale treatment that's going to be done over a period of 1.5 years to see how efficient this process in removing short chain PFAS. So one of the some challenges in the sequestration approach, you have to remember, we are not destroying PFAS, we are just capturing them. We are concentrating this PFAS, and all these PFAS need to go somewhere. But the current practices is we incinerate them, we combust the GAC, which is not very efficient. We pretty much reintroduce PFAS back into the environment. So this kind of leads to the next step, is we need to identify destructive technology where you actually break down PFAS molecules, right? And destructive technologies are like in developmental stages right now. So we don't have like a commercially available or a full-scale system, maybe 1 or 2, but not very prominent across the US. That's because the carbon-fluorine bond, as I mentioned, it's one of the strongest bonds in the universe. So you require a lot of energy to break them down, break these PFAS molecules. And for example, in engineering term, we use this term called electrical energy per order. This is the amount of energy needed to break down a chemical by 90%, right? So lower the value, so it's less energy is required. Higher the value, you need more energy to require. So if you look at this figure, these are many toxic chemicals, many of which is already regulated in water. You can see the amount of energy required is fairly low, but if you look at PFOA and PFOS, they require like 1,000 times, in some cases 10,000 times higher amount of energy to actually break them down. So this limitation. And the second limitation is like, even if we break down PFOA and PFOS, they transform into these other products, which are unable to characterize it with the current analytical methods. So these are unknown transformation products, and we're not sure about the how toxic these chemicals are. So there are some knowledge gap, and we are trying to do some research to understand these transformations. So one of the work or technology, a destructive technology we're using is electron beam treatment. It's essentially a beam of electron bombarded on your contaminated water. And you can see this is how it looks. The change in color essentially shows the treatment of the PFAS here. It's a great, the figure over here. And the video over here. And in this figure on the right, we could see like the electron beam is actually pretty efficient in treating most of the PFAS that we studied. We still had trouble in degrading the short chain PFAS because it required even more energy than the long chain PFAS. We were still able to achieve it, but it required more energy to break down short chain PFAS with this approach. Other ongoing research in the lab is to understand the transformation of PFAS. Sorry to scare you with all these different chemical diagrams over here, but I added this figure to kind of highlight the complexity of the transformation of PFAS. We are trying to understand what causes PFAS to break down, what it transformed into, and we are assessing an easy way to identify these breakdown products if it exists in treated drinking water quality. And we're also working on other like novel treatment approaches like called advanced reduction processes by using a combination of oxidant and reductant in the presence of UV light, or we are using electrochemistry or like electricity and chemical reactions to break down PFAS. So to summarize this and some take homes, I gave a lot of information in this presentation. The stability and surfactant nature of PFAS make many treatment technologies ineffective for PFAS remediation. Even aggressive technologies like thermal treatment and chemical oxidation require extreme conditions like high pH, temperature, and pressure, which becomes economically infeasible. Sequestration approach do work, at least for many of the regulated chemicals, but the downside is it's not as efficient to remove shorter chain PFAS because it breaks through quickly and it increases the cost of operation. And the sequestration does not degrade PFAS. You end up concentrating them, and we need another step to degrade PFAS, right? Otherwise, it's reintroduced back into the environment. Destructive approaches are in development stages and more research is needed. And one important challenge is many of these approaches we're not able to close the mass balance on PFAS because there are some transformation products we still don't understand, and we want to know whether these are toxic or not before using these technologies. But one thing is for sure, not one technology solves our problem. We need a combination of technology. We need to first capture them by using a sequestration approach, and then use another technology to destroy them to have complete destruction of PFAS. I know my talk was focused on PFAS treatment, but I just also wanted to highlight some of the other work that we are going in our group. We're also interested in studying the PFAS occurrence, fate, and transport. So we're looking at bioaccumulation and how abundant they are in coastal environments and how they segregate themselves between organisms and sediments and so on. We have another study that looks like how PFAS leaches from landfills, because many of the carbon or like adsorbent are like added into the landfills, and PFAS will eventually leach from them. So we are assessing conditions that leads to the leaching of PFAS that may pollute the groundwater again. And we're also interested in studying how PFAS is occurring in biosolids. So we're currently doing a nationwide survey of PFAS in biosolids because many of the biosolids is applied on land as a fertilizer, and we're pretty much reintroducing PFAS. So we are trying to understand how abundant these PFAS are in these materials. With that, I'd like to thank my team and the funding sources for many of the projects. And at this point, I'll stop my presentation and hand it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Dr. Venkatesan, for sharing your latest work on the treatment of PFAS and some of the sequestration and destructive technologies for PFAS. Now, for those interested on regulations that have been implemented, let us learn from Ms. Dorina Aliu from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency on how EPA is committed to regulating PFAS in our nation's drinking water. Ms. Aliu serves as the supervisor of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Section in U.S. EPA Region 2, where she leads an interdisciplinary team and is responsible for overseeing primacy agency implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the region's underground injection control program. Ms. Aliu plays a vital role in the safeguarding of drinking water and awarding critical water infrastructure funding in New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands. Over to you, Ms. Aliu.
Thank you for the introduction, Vaishnavi, and thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. As you mentioned, my name is Dorina Aliu. I serve as supervisor of the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection section in EPA Region 2, where my role is to oversee implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act and national primary drinking water rules across the states, territories, and federally recognized Indian nations that make up Region 2. As a start, I'll go through the agenda for tonight's discussion. My colleague Kelly from USGS talked about some of the data that's being developed to help inform PFAS regulations. And tonight, I'm excited to share with you some of the key actions that the agency is taking, some of which Kelly has mentioned, as part of its commitment to addressing PFAS. We've outlined these actions in EPA's PFAS strategic roadmap, which includes key commitments for the agency, including its commitment to develop a drinking water rule to regulate PFAS in drinking water. I'll start this presentation by sharing with you the principles and goals that guided the strategic roadmap's development and that underpin its success. And then I'll share some key areas of progress that EPA has made in implementing this roadmap thus far. I'll also talk about some upcoming actions that are being led by each of our program offices throughout EPA, and discuss specific commitments that we've made, as well as anticipated timelines for those commitments. And finally, I'll cover transformational investments made by the bipartisan infrastructure law towards addressing PFAS and other emerging contaminants. So to start with a bit of background, in April of 2021, EPA Administrator Michael Regan established the EPA Council on PFAS, and he charged it to develop a bold, strategic, whole-of-agency approach to protect the public and environment from the impacts of PFAS. The council is comprised of senior technical and policy leaders from across EPA, and the council met Administrator Regan's call through the development of the PFAS strategic roadmap, which does several things. It includes clear timelines for concrete actions that the agency is taking from 2021 through 2024. It fills a critical gap in federal leadership and sets a basic floor of protection across the country. It also supports states' ongoing efforts to tackle PFAS. And I know Kelly mentioned in New York and New Jersey, the state regulates PFAS, but we don't currently have a federal regulation on PFAS. We're building on critical science, methods, tools, and technologies, and using that to inform the proposed regulations. We're also building on EPA's commitment to restore scientific integrity by making science the foundation of our work. Just want to make sure, sorry. I'll talk a little bit about this life cycle diagram on this slide, which shows some of the ways in which PFAS are used and can enter the environment. And we already covered some of this earlier on in some of the other presentations. But the ways in which PFAS can enter the environment include pollution from manufacturing facilities, discharges from PFAS-containing firefighting foam, PFAS entering wastewater treatment facilities from upstream sources, PFAS applied to agricultural fields as a component of biosolids, which was just mentioned. And biosolids are the solid organic matter that's left over from the wastewater treatment process. Through these diverse pathways, PFAS contamination presents unique challenges, and EPA's approach to tackling PFAS takes this uniqueness into account. So we consider first the life cycle of PFAS, including their unique properties, the ubiquity of their uses, and the multiple pathways for exposure. Second, we're getting upstream of the problem by bringing a deeper focus to preventing PFAS from entering the environment in the first place. Third, we're working to hold polluters accountable for their actions and for PFAS remediation efforts. Fourth, we're ensuring science-based decision-making and investing in scientific research that helps to fill in gaps in our understanding of PFAS. And fifth, we're prioritizing the protection of disadvantaged communities to ensure that these communities have equitable access to solutions. EPA's goals in the strategic roadmap include evaluating and understanding the risks posed by PFAS, And that demands that EPA tackle the problem on multiple fronts at the same time. The actions described in our roadmap each represent important and meaningful steps to safeguarding communities, and we believe that these actions build upon one another and will lead to more enduring and protective solutions. Our approach to PFAS is focused on 3 goals. First, research. We're investing in research, development, innovation, all to increase our understanding of PFAS exposures and toxicities, human health and ecological effects, and actions that we can take to incorporate the best available science. Second, we're working to restrict. We're pursuing a comprehensive approach to proactively prevent PFAS from entering air, land, and water at levels that can adversely impact human health and the environment. And third, remediate. We're broadening and accelerating the cleanup of PFAS contamination. In the PFAS roadmap, we committed to issuing a public report on our progress each year. And last fall, we released our first progress report summarizing the actions we had taken at that point, which included proposing a national primary drinking water regulation for 6 PFAS compounds. We've proposed to designate 2 PFAS as hazardous substances under CERCLA or the Superfund. We've laid a foundation for enhancing data on PFAS. We've begun distributing $10 billion in funding to address emerging contaminants under the bipartisan infrastructure law. We've expanded the scientific understanding of PFAS and translated it into our efforts. We've proactively used enforcement tools to better identify and address PFAS releases, and we're taking the appropriate enforcement action in response. We've also released a set of PFAS analytic tools to publicly share data on PFAS in communities. And finally, we are engaging with federal partners and with the public. Our PFAS work is informed by webinars, stakeholder meetings, congressional testimony, and engagement with EPA's federal advisory committees. So in addition to highlighting the actions we've taken, our progress report also identifies a series of upcoming priority actions for this year and for the years ahead, including finalizing the drinking water regulation that EPA proposed this March and that Kelly mentioned earlier this evening. We're taking action on the proposed CERCLA designation for PFOA and PFOS. We're continuing to improve chemical data and safety. We're also working to restrict upstream PFAS discharges to waterways and address PFAS in biosolids. And finally, we're actively engaging with communities, and we've already done a series of listening sessions throughout this year, which was hosted by each of the regions throughout EPA. And we have recordings and slides from those sessions available on EPA's website. We gathered the feedback from those community meetings and used that to inform the finalization of the draft drinking water regulation. Over the next few slides, I'll cover some of the program-specific commitments from various offices, starting with our Office of Research and Development, or ORD. As I highlighted earlier, science and research are the foundation of the work that we do on PFAS, and we're currently working to improve our scientific understanding in 3 primary areas. First, we're working to develop and validate methods to detect and measure PFAS in the environment. Second, we're working to advance the science to assess human health and environmental risks from PFAS. And in that effort, our scientists are developing human health toxicity assessments for additional PFAS substances. They're compiling and summarizing the available and relevant scientific information, identifying PFAS sources, the ways in which PFAS move in the environment, and the pathways by which people can be exposed. We're also characterizing how PFAS exposure can contribute to cumulative impacts on communities. So if you're exposed through drinking water and air, that will lead to cumulative effects, and we're looking further into that. Third, we're working to evaluate and develop technologies for reducing PFAS in the environment. And this work is helping to inform our decisions on drinking water and wastewater treatment, contaminated site cleanup and remediation, air emissions controls, and end-of-life materials management. As we mentioned, when we treat for PFAS, you end up with waste material, and we need to think about how that material is going to be stored or treated. So next, I'll cover some of our work to ensure chemical safety. Our Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention is working on many actions to restrict PFAS, including deepening our understanding of the categories, PFAS categories through the National PFAS Testing Strategy. This strategy aims to break PFAS into distinct categories to direct research, to amplify our regulatory actions, and to accelerate technology and policy solutions to restrict and remediate PFAS. We're also working to strengthen our oversight over both new and existing PFAS. We're working to ensure a robust review process for new PFAS to ensure that these chemicals are safe before they enter commerce. And we're working to review existing PFAS to make sure that they aren't being used in ways that present concerns. We're working on collecting data, improving reporting on how PFAS are used and released. And we're working on a final rule to better characterize the sources and quantities of manufactured PFAS throughout the United States. Finally, we're also working to reduce the presence of PFAS in products purchased by the federal government. In 2021, President Biden signed an executive order that promotes sustainable federal purchasing, and it prioritizes the purchase of products without added PFAS. So next, I'll cover our Office of Water, which is taking an extensive set of actions to protect drinking water and our lakes, rivers, and streams. Specifically, in respect to drinking water, EPA undertook a key step earlier this year towards protecting public health by proposing the first ever national drinking water standard for PFAS. I'll cover this rule in a little bit more detail in the next slide, but in the meantime, I'll mention that we are actively working to improve drinking water data through our monitoring, toxicity assessments, and health advisories. We're also working to improve our understanding of how communities, including low-income communities, are exposed to PFAS in drinking water. We're taking an important step towards building that data set by monitoring drinking water in communities across the country through our 5th Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, which we refer to as UCMR 5. This program is a program that tests for 29 PFAS chemicals. Testing started earlier this year in January, and it runs through 2025. This is testing done by public drinking water systems where they test, thousands of systems are testing nationwide. And it was actually a previous round of UCMR sampling that went from 2013 to 2015 that actually helped us to discover PFAS contamination in drinking water and led to significant state and local actions to safeguard drinking water. So with UCMR 5, we're building on that UCMR 3 data set, and we're taking it a step further by testing for nearly 5 times more PFAS chemicals at significantly more water systems. And we're using methods that can detect PFAS at much lower levels. Here in Region 2, for example, there are 700 public water systems that serve over 29 million customers, which are participating in UCMR 5 and have to conduct sampling for these 29 PFAS chemicals from January of this year through 2025. This research builds on the PFAS occurrence data that's been gathered by our fellow agencies, including by USGS and the data that was shared earlier this evening. Also, and this is separate from drinking water, under the Clean Water Act, we're working to develop national technology-based discharge limits for industries that use PFAS. We're working to address PFAS in permitting and through analytical methods, water quality criteria, and even in fish advisories. We're also working on improved analytical methods to measure more PFAS in more places. And last spring, EPA released draft aquatic life quality criteria for public comment for PFOA and PFOS. And this reflects the latest peer-reviewed scientific information regarding the effects of these chemicals on freshwater aquatic organisms. We're also working to enhance data availability on PFAS in fish tissue to help states and tribes set PFAS fish advisories, because we know that PFAS accumulates in fish, and consumption of that fish can pose a threat to public health. And finally, as I referenced earlier, we're working to evaluate the risks of PFAS and biosolids to determine whether a regulation of PFOA and PFAS in biosolids is appropriate. In the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit about the drinking water rule and what we've proposed. This rule proposes to set maximum contaminant levels to regulate PFOA and PFOS as individual contaminants. And it also regulates PFHXS, PFNA, PFBS, and GenX chemicals as a PFAS mixture. EPA is also proposing maximum contaminant level goals for these 6 PFAS. Maximum contaminant level goals are the maximum level of a contaminant in drinking water where there are no known or anticipated negative health effects, and these allow for a margin of safety. So this slide shows the proposed MCLs and MCLGs, or I showed it in this slide, sorry. You can see the proposed health-based goals for PFOA and PFOS are actually set to 0 due to the fact that they've been determined to be likely human carcinogens. And this is consistent with how the agency addresses setting goals for known or likely carcinogens under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The proposed MCLs are set to 4 parts per trillion, which we set as close as feasible to the MCL goals. And when I say feasible, we talked a little bit about treatment technologies, and in setting federal regulations, we have to consider practical limitations and some of the levels that those treatment technologies can treat PFAS compounds down to. So for feasibility determinations, we look at the availability of analytical methods to reliably measure and quantify PFAS at these levels. And as I mentioned, we also look at treatment technologies that are available and currently in use, and how low they can get the PFAS concentrations down to. For the 4 PFAS that are proposed to be addressed as a mixture, we've set a unitless hazardous index of 1 for both the goal and for the enforceable maximum contaminant level. A hazard index is a calculation that we use to evaluate public health risk from exposure to a mixture of chemicals or compounds. And if the proposal for this rule moves forward, this would be the first time that we've ever set an MCL as a hazard index. So I'm quickly showing the calculation here, and Kelly touched on it earlier. I think the visual helps to understand what this approach means. This is looking at the combined toxicity of these 4 PFAS compounds in drinking water. And the calculation for a hazard index is a sum of fractions. Each of these fractions compares the concentration of PFAS that's measured in the water, which is the numerator, to the highest concentration determined not to have any risk of health effects. We call that the health-based water concentration, and that's the number in the denominator. So the sum of these fractions makes up the hazard index value, and according to our regulation, if this value exceeds 1, that would prompt a series of actions that the public water system would take. The proposed rule requires public water systems to not only monitor for PFAS, but also to notify the public if the levels of PFAS are exceeded. It also requires the system to reduce the levels of PFAS in drinking water if they exceed the proposed standards. Following publication of the proposed rule, we opened up a 60-day public comment period. And during this time, EPA held several informational webinars and public hearings to garner public feedback. We received more than 122,000 comments in response to our proposed PFAS drinking water rule. We read through each of those comments, and we are considering all of the comments that we received from the public as part of the finalization of this regulation. We anticipate that the final rule will be published by the end of this calendar year. So in this slide, I'll quickly cover actions being taken by 2 of our program offices, our Office of Land and Emergency Management, which houses EPA's cleanup programs, and our Office of Air and Radiation, where our team of experts works to address air pollution. First, we'll talk a little bit about an action I highlighted earlier under CERCLA, which is the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, and we commonly refer to it as Superfund. Last fall, EPA published a proposed rule to designate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under CERCLA. And if we finalize this rule, it requires facilities across the country to report PFOA and PFOS releases. It also enhances the ability of federal and tribal nations and also state and local authorities to obtain information regarding the location and extent of releases. It also enhances the ability of EPA and other agencies to respond to releases of these compounds or even threats of releases. And finally, it helps establish national consistency in how we evaluate the cleanup of PFOA and PFOS, and it encourages better waste management practices. As an additional step, we're considering designating other PFAS chemicals as CERCLA hazardous substances as well. And finally, we recently updated the screening and removal levels that are used to help identify the areas, contaminants, and conditions that require further federal attention, or where a removal action may be appropriate as part of a Superfund cleanup. So next, I'll talk a little bit about the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which we refer to as RCRA. Under RCRA, we are looking to add specific PFAS to the list of hazardous constituents, which would mean that these PFAS are subject to RCRA corrective action requirements. We're also looking to clarify that emerging contaminants such as PFAS can be cleaned up through the RCRA corrective actions process. In this slide, I highlighted a few commitments that EPA has made to taking significant steps towards updating our research and guidance on PFAS destruction and disposal. We've published interim guidance as of December of 2020, in which we highlighted significant uncertainties about the effectiveness of some of the PFAS destruction and disposal technologies that are currently available. And we're working on a deadline to update this guidance by the end of 2023. Finally, our Office of Air and Radiation is also taking steps towards restricting PFAS by building on the technical foundation required for a potential Clean Air Act regulation. So we're working to identify sources of PFAS in air and to develop monitoring approaches and information on mitigation technologies, and also to increase our understanding of the fate and transport of PFAS air emissions. This work is going to support future decision-making on whether to designate PFAS as hazardous air pollutants under the Clean Air Act. So no conversation about PFAS is complete without highlighting some of the transformational investments that we're making through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which we affectionately refer to as BILL. BILL was signed in November of 2021, and it provides the single largest investment in clean water that the federal government has ever made. It will build on the research, restrictions, and remediation called for in the PFAS roadmap by providing $10 billion for communities impacted by PFAS and other emerging contaminants. The bill uses 3 of EPA's existing water finance programs, but it focuses them specifically on PFAS and emerging contaminants. And out of that $10 billion, $4 billion will flow through our drinking water state revolving funds to help install critical treatment technologies and make infrastructure upgrades to help treat for PFAS in drinking water. Another $1 billion will help to address PFAS in clean water. And $5 billion will provide grants to address emerging contaminants in small and disadvantaged communities. These funds will be allotted directly to states and territories over a period of 5 years, which started in 2022 and will run through 2025. And ultimately, states have to determine the eligibility for projects that are eligible for bill funds. They'll make the project selections and then subaward those funds to public water systems or to communities. Out of these funds, all of them, out of all the funds that I mentioned, all of the funds will be provided without a requirement for state match through grants or principal forgiveness loans. And because we're committed to maximizing the impact of these funds in addressing urgent water challenges, we've set up a technical assistance program, which we call Water TA, to assist communities in need apply for and gain access to critical infrastructure funding, and also to tap into technical, managerial, and financial support through these bill programs. All of this information is available on EPA's website if you'd like to know more about these grant programs. But in closing, I really want to reiterate that we're really excited about the far-reaching impacts of this bill funding, and we're thrilled that these funds will enable communities to implement PFAS solutions while we continue to take action to research, restrict, and remediate. And in closing, I'll mention that I encourage you all to visit EPA's website, where you can find more information on the PFAS roadmap. Thank you for your interest in this topic and for listening. I'm happy to answer questions during the question and answer portion of this webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Aliu, for sharing what EPA's key roadmap actions and how EPA is committed to addressing PFAS and protecting public health. Also, it was great hearing some of EPA's accomplishments and how you're actively working with communities to combat this problem and some of the funding that is going into this. Finally, we have with us Ms. Flora Norkute from American Water, who will share with us what American Water is doing to address PFAS in drinking water. Ms. Norkute is the Director of Water Quality and Environmental Compliance for New Jersey's American Water. She has nearly 10 years of experience in water and wastewater industry. She is responsible for the company's environmental initiatives and its compliance with water quality and environmental rules and regulations statewide. Over to you, Ms. Norkute.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me. Give me just a second to share my screen. Okay. All right, hopefully you could see my screen and can hear me. I will do my best to go through this semi-fast, just so that everyone can get to dinner if they're sticking around for the last couple of minutes of the presentations. So thanks again for having me. I'll be talking today a little bit about what New Jersey American Water is doing when in regards to PFAS treatment in drinking water. So I'll start with discussing a little bit more about New Jersey American Water, a little bit about what we do to monitor drinking water, the PFAS treatment we have in place, and of course, where you can find your water quality information. So start by just saying that New Jersey American Water is the largest investor-owned water and wastewater services provider in the state of New Jersey. We have over 850 amazing employees that work days, nights, weekends, and holidays to keep the water running and our wastewater services going throughout the year, 24/7, 365. In New Jersey, we serve 2.8 million people in 18 counties, and you could see the map there showing you in dark blue our water and wastewater services, and in light blue just water services, and one county, Bergen County, is just our wastewater services. So we have a lot of infrastructure in the state of New Jersey. I'm going to focus only on the source water since today we're talking about PFAS contamination of source water. So our source water supply in drinking water is about 71% surface water and 22% groundwater. And there's 7% of purchased water, which means we purchase drinking water for other public utilities. So really, if you're living in Somerset County, going into Mercer County, and you are a New Jersey American Water customer, a large percentage of your water supply is surface water with a small supplemental supply of groundwater. So moving into drinking water, I never like to assume that that someone knows how drinking water is treated. I'm not going to get in too many details. We have this diagram available on our website, so if you wanted to take a look and read all about drinking water treatment or wastewater treatment, you're able to do that. I do have to say that it is a complex chemical problem that we solve every day by doing drinking water treatment. What I have in front of the screen is surface water treatment, right? Where we take surface water from your lakes, reservoirs, or rivers. We treat it by removing initially the first treatment, 3 steps are large particulate matter. And then we go into finer matter and pathogens and bacteria by removing that by filtration and inactivating that by disinfection. Once it leaves their water treatment plants, it goes into the distribution system. So that pipe network underground that you never see until there's a main break. And then something you do see are storage towers, right? If you go along the highway, sometimes you'll see a tower that has a big New Jersey American Water star, and some have, their town names on them. So those are our storage towers, and that's where the water is stored for pressure until you open up the tap and it flows down those invisible pipelines into your home. So that's just a little bit about drinking water treatment. Now, if you're wondering where does PFAS fall into all of this, it really depends whether you're looking at groundwater or surface water. So in surface water treatment, we currently do not have any surface water. I think in the United States, we don't have any surface water or PFAS treatment plants. New Jersey American Water is the first one to pilot surface water PFAS treatment at our Short Hills plant here in New Jersey. And usually in surface water that would go on after filtration and between filtration and disinfection. And if you have groundwater, you do not have that particulate removal because groundwater comes naturally from beneath the earth, so that particulate matter doesn't exist. So you're just looking to remove pathogens or target any particular compounds that may be found in that groundwater, like PFAS, right? So that would be kind of the pumping of the groundwater, removal of any particular contaminant or pathogen like PFAS, and then disinfection and moving into the storage and distribution system. So that's just a little bit about the process. Now, as far as monitoring is concerned, New Jersey American Water monitors a lot in our source waters. I'm focusing here and showing a picture of a Raritan and Millstone River confluence. You could see an algal bloom going on in this picture. This is back from summer of 2022. You probably read that in the headlines and newspapers back when this was happening. But nonetheless, this harmful algal blooms are just one of the many things we monitor for. So we monitor for basic water chemistry, your pH, alkalinity, turbidity. We monitor for inorganic and organic compounds, both regulated and unregulated. And for some groundwater systems, especially in southern New Jersey, they have some naturally occurring radiological compounds, so we have to monitor for those. Now, under organic compounds, this is where treatment PFAS it falls under. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I did want to just recognize my team. New Jersey American Water has over 30 water quality specialists and environmental compliance specialists, and all they do is go out there, sample, analyze, and ensure compliance with drinking water and wastewater regulations. So New Jersey American Water takes and analyzes over 200,000 water quality samples a year from our source waters, treatment plants, and distribution systems. And this is not, I am not counting wastewater. So this is a conservative estimate just for drinking water. So I'm going to get into the PFAS. So I think we mentioned this a little bit in the beginning of the presentations, but in 2018, New Jersey was actually the first state to establish an enforceable drinking water standard for PFAS chemicals. It set the maximum contaminant level for PFNA, and later in 2020, they established the MCL for PFOA and PFAS, and you could see that was 13 and 14 parts per trillion. Now, I have a screenshot of New Jersey DEP's data. So they provide their violation data. This is from 2022. So they're showing how many maximum contaminant level violations and exceedances there were in New Jersey back in 2022, and how many monitoring violations there were in 2022. So you could see that just in 2022, they had community water systems had 38 MCL violations, and 34 different systems had monitoring violations. So according to New Jersey DEP, to date, 48 community water systems have received at least one PFAS MCL violation since 2018, when the first MCL was established. I'm happy to say that New Jersey American Water is not one of those systems. So if you have our water, if you're receiving a bill from New Jersey American Water, or if you know we are your water provider, I can tell you that we have not received any of those violations, and we are well within this required standards for New Jersey DEP's maximum contaminant level. Now, what was our approach and what continues to be our approach as we look at different regulations coming out from EPA? So our first approach is always to monitor. We want to know what's in our drinking, what's in our source water, and what's in our drinking water. We don't shy away from that. And as I showed earlier, we take a whole lot of, we have a big team, a hardworking team that takes a whole lot of samples and analyzes those results to make sure that we understand what our source water and drinking water looks like and what it has. We assess and plan. So once we have those data points for occurrences, in this case, it could be PFAS, but it really applies to any other contaminant as well. We plan. We look at whether some contaminant level is increasing, whether it's staying the same, whether it's approaching a maximum contaminant level, and we try to plan for that. So if let's say let's take us back to 2014, right? When we had UCMR3, which I think someone mentioned. UCMR3 was the unregulated contaminant rule monitoring that we did for occurrence of PFAS. We saw that we had some PFAS detects, so we started to plan and research what we needed to do, including piloting some of these new, what seemed to be new technologies at the time for drinking water treatment for PFAS. Once we knew what technologies we wanted to use, we designed and implemented those solutions. So a lot of engineering work goes into design and then implementation for that treatment. So I could say that our first facility for New Jersey American Water for PFAS treatment came on in 2014, and then we slowly picked up and started treating our other systems as we found occurrences of PFAS. So I did want to go over a little bit of what I would say the regular or the most useful and used PFAS treatment technologies are in drinking water right now. We saw a little bit about research that's being done on the future, but these are the two, and I would say three, that are the work well and are most used. So the granular activated carbon GAC treatment, which we had discussed earlier, the ion exchange, which is a resin that is also absorption depending on the resin and porosity of the resin, but could also remove PFAS, and it can be particular to specializing for PFAS removal. And it really would depend on the water quality and the water data that we have, which is actually really good. And that's why it has high efficiency removal rates. And of course, membrane filtration also exists. Now, this is a more expensive treatment, and usually drinking water utilities choose membrane filtration when there's another particulate or contaminant that they're trying to remove besides just PFAS. GAC and ion exchange can be similar in cost depending on the water quality that you have, but certainly if you have the right water quality, the ion exchange resin is a higher efficiency removal, and it's a slightly more environmentally friendly because resin can be recharged. So once it's exhausted, it could go back to a facility and be recharged and reused again. So for New Jersey American Water, I'm going to cover two of our PFAS treatment facilities. In the corner, you could see a picture of what PFAS treatment looks like. There are these huge vessels, 10 to 12 feet in diameter, and I'm sure they could get bigger as we look at surface water treatment plants. But right now, I'm just wanted to highlight these two, and mostly I'm highlighting these two because they've won award. So our Shore Hill station, we detected PFAS. This was probably back in prior to 2018, maybe in 2018. So we implemented the ion exchange system to treat the emerging compounds 9 months ahead of any regulatory requirements set by New Jersey DEP, and that particular system won the 2020 Governor's Environmental Excellence Award. And our Springfield station, again, these stations are named after their town, so easy to know where they are, also detected PFAS. And this was a huge project, a big lift, because we had to basically redo the entire facility and install treatment in order to accommodate these big PFAS vessels. So we had to rebuild the building, we had to install new chemical feeds, new pumps, and basically everything else that you could think of in order to accommodate PFAS treatment. And that particular treatment facility won the New Jersey Alliance for Action Leading Infrastructure Project Award in February of 2021. Now, the reason I'm here is because we love communicating with our customers, right? We want everyone to know how well we're doing and what we're looking at. So first and foremost, I highly suggest you visit our website. We have so much information on your drinking water there. If you're interested just in particular on PFAS, you can find more information and fact sheets and what American Water is doing. We have a great research and development group. It does a lot of research projects and pilot studies, and they partner with universities and other drinking water companies. So you can find more information about what they're doing on amwater.com/PFAS. If you're more interested about what your water quality looks like, right? In New Jersey, you could visit the New Jersey amwater.com website. And if you go under water quality, which I have a screenshot here, this is our website. If you click onto water quality reports, click on water quality, then water quality reports, it'll take you to this page where you could enter your zip code and find your report, and it'll generate your latest water quality report. And that will give you all the information you can find on what is in your drinking water. I highly encourage you to check this out. And even if you are not a New Jersey American Water customer, if you have a public water supply, every drinking water community system is required to provide water quality reports. Sometimes they're called consumer confidence reports. So you could check out their website and look for the consumer confidence report or water quality report. And if you can't find it on their website, just give them a call. But I guarantee you they have them out there. You just have to, sometimes some folks just have to dig a little deeper. But that is it for me. I hope I stayed within my 15 minutes and able to answer, of course, any questions at the end of this.
Thank you, Ms. Norkute, for providing the insights from American Water and the effort you and your team put into your thorough monitoring of our sources of water, ensuring that we are able to have safe drinking water. Our organization will be really interested in visiting some of those treatment facilities in the future. Now, we have some time for taking questions from our attendees. You can post them in the Q&A section if you haven't already. I saw that there were already two questions that were, actually 3 questions that were answered. Is it possible that we could re-answer them out loud so that everyone can hear the responses? So the first question is, thank you, Kelly. Did your study differentiate between long and short PFAS chains?
Yes, so I did answer this in the chat, and I also put a link to the actual data. But yes, we analyzed for 32 typical PFAS, similar to what the EPA is measuring right now. It includes some short chain and long chain PFAS. So some of the ones that were discussed today, PFBS, PFBA, or PFBA, things like that.
Thank you. And another question I saw are companies responsible for producing PFAS working to mitigate and remediate the problem? Is EPA enforcing rules around it?
So as I mentioned during the presentation, there are a number of regulations and regulatory actions underway to require companies that contributed to PFAS contamination to remediate those impacts. And until those regulations are finalized, we would not have a basis for enforcement. However, there are various state level programs that can be used and state regulations that can be used as the basis for enforcement. So The federal regulations are currently underway, but there are other mechanisms and laws that allow us to require these companies to be accountable.
Thank you. And additionally, I saw another question that was, thank you, Ms. Aliu. How exactly will the funding from BIL be utilized for solving the issues of PFAS, and is there a more specific breakdown of the funding available at this time?
So I typed a response in the chat, but just to expand upon that, Bill provides funding for a number of activities related to PFAS treatment, including sampling to investigate whether or not PFAS is a problem in the community served by a particular public water system. I should clarify that this funding is mostly for public water systems, but there is funding set aside for small and disadvantaged communities. And this funding would go to the public water system to investigate whether or not they have a problem with PFAS. And then if they discover that they do have PFAS contaminants in water, to procure engineering services and to put together a plan for how they're going to treat and address the issue. And then also the funding would cover the cost of treatment. So actually, you know, if for example, we talked about granular activated carbon or GAC, if the public water system decided that they want to install carbon treatment, then they could use the bill funds to purchase the GAC vessels and then also the media inside of those vessels and actually, you know, the physical treatment equipment or instrumentation. So it kind of covers a wide range of activities, including the engineering support and then the physical treatment itself.
Thank you so much. And another question was, thank you so much for the presentation and the discussion. I would like to have the slides if it is possible to share. Many thanks to all the speakers. So is it possible for you guys to share the slides or any of the links from the slides?
I can provide a copy of my slides, but much of that material is available on the EPA website. If you look at the PFAS Strategic Roadmap report, and it goes into much more detail than my slides do. So I'm going to drop a link to the PFAS roadmap in response to that question, if that's okay.
And I will go ahead and drop links to the paper, the dashboard, and our drop by drop in response to that question.
I may have to provide an updated version. I have some unpublished data included in my talk, which I can remove and I can share the rest of the general information.
Okay then. If there's any more questions, if anyone wants to have put any more questions in the chat. I guess there isn't any more questions. So then I think this concludes our webinar. Thank you to our panelists for taking your time to share your expertise on PFAS, and not only on PFAS, but also on other contaminants. It was really interesting hearing from all of you, and the attendees and I have definitely learned a lot more about PFAS and some of the regulations and initiatives to combat this national problem. And additionally, thank you to all our participants for attending the webinar and for your thoughtful community questions. Thank you all and have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you. And thanks for organizing.
Thank you so much for organizing.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.